I always loved Cartoon Network when I was growing up. It was my favorite channel to watch. Even today it has some good shows, like Adventure Time and Regular Show. One of the newest shows on Cartoon Network, The Amazing World of Gumball, is a cute and mildly entertaining show. It's not really my cup of tea, it's a little immature, but my little brother seems to like it a lot. One day I was watching Adult Swim when I realized that I had been up so late that I hadn't even kept track of time. It was already 4 a.m. I don't ever recall watching Adult Swim this late. So, I stayed awake to see what would happen when it ended. A little bumper showed up on the bottom of the screen during a commercial break. It said that a special episode of The Amazing World of Gumball was about to come on. I was a little confused about an episode of a very popular new show coming on this early. When I was bored, I decided to watch it, thinking it might come on later in the day so I could spoil it for my brother. Sorta mean, I know, but whatever. The flashy and energetic intro theme played, although it was played a little differently than I recalled. The music was a little different, and the show's logo wasn't animated. Its colors were done rather sloppily as well, almost like something a little kid would do on a doodle board, or a glow board or something. I ignored it, assuming that it was just done for this special episode. The title of the episode was The Greiving. Sort of a sad title. I didn't pay much attention to it. It began with Gumball, the show's 12-year-old protagonist, standing alone, facing a corner of his dimly lit classroom. He looked absolutely miserable, a far cry from the cheerful demeanor that he usually had. There was no one else in the room, not even his best friend and adopted brother, Darwin the goldfish. And the windows in the room clearly showed the night sky outside. I was really starting to get confused. Why would he be at school at night? And why was he standing in the corner all sad and alone? After what seemed like a minute of Gumball standing somberly in the corner, the scene suddenly changed. We were in Gumball's house. Once again, the scene is silent and a little disquieting. Richard, Gumball's enormous rabbit father, walks in from the kitchen. He looked even more miserable than Gumball had in the previous scene. Richard wasn't wearing his usual attire. He was dressed in a fancy black suit, a little uncharacteristic of him, as he's usually a slob. He sighed and slumped down on the sofa. He started sobbing intensely, sounding like someone who had just lost something important. I was starting to get a little creeped out. Where was the silly, fun cartoon that I usually look forward to watching with my younger brother? This was something completely different. I was beginning to think that this might have been something the creators did, as an experiment or something. A test of the animation or sound, perhaps. Though, it couldn't have been. Aside from the opening theme, which was still different from the final shows, the episode had been much quieter than it usually was. Only subtle sounds and very little music. And the animation was nothing to write home about either. It was done a little bit like an amateur Flash on Newgrounds. The character designs were somewhat sloppy and rushed looking, and the real-life backgrounds used for the shows looked different. As confused and somewhat frightened as I was, for some reason I kept watching it. Poor Richard, he was still sobbing on the sofa. As the front door opened suddenly, making me jump a bit at such a loud noise. Gumball's mother, Nicole, a blue cat like him, stepped in. Like Richard, she wasn't wearing her usual outfit. For some reason, she was in a black dress. and was wearing a pretty black hat to match. Nicole sat down on the couch to comfort her husband, although she was looking a bit saddened herself. By this point, Richard's crying head began to get more pained and miserable sounding. This wasn't the normal cartoon crying in the show. This was realistic. almost depressing. I felt like sobbing myself. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the sad scene at their home ended, as it shifted back to the school. However, we weren't in Gumball's classroom this time. We were in Principal Brown's office. Nicole and Richard were there, in their usual clothes, looking more normal and happy than they had before, but still slightly worried. Principal Brown, however, looked extremely sad. He quietly and somberly informed them that their children, Anais and Darwin, were not present after lunch that day. They hadn't been seen at all the rest of the day. Nicole was instantly furious at him. She began spouting various insults and calls at him that I don't think would have made it into a more mature program like regular show. I was laughing at this because it seemed sort of funny for Nicole to flip out in this manner, start swearing like a sailor in a G-rated cartoon. But my outlook soon changed when Principal Brown told her something else that she finally quieted down. His eyes began to tear up. He informed them that they eventually were found, but they had not been found alive. He then went into graphic and nearly nauseating detail describing how their bodies were found, their parents sitting in utter shock. They could hardly believe what was happening. How could such a cheery and fun kids show be taking such a dark and twisted turn? I was considering turning the television off, but I was too scared to be left alone in the dark. Nearly frozen by fear, and disturbed intensely at the terrible things he's saying. Another flashback. The scene was earlier that day, and the animation in this scene was even worse than earlier. I don't remember it very clearly, but I think he began his recollection by saying that the school had called the police department when they first turned up missing, believing that the kids had simply ran off and decided to skip school. They said it was very uncharacteristic of both Darwin and Anais to go skipping school like delinquents. Darwin was a little naive and a bit ditzy, but he was a good kid. Wouldn't have even dreamed of doing something like that. And Anais was even less likely to run away. She was a straight-A student, despite only being 4. Which also troubled the police, seeing as a defenseless 4-year-old little girl was missing, as well as an older boy. The school had been thoroughly checked, so the police started searching the heavily wooded area outside the school. It took little time for the police to discover the horrifying fate of Anais, however. In a small clearing outside of the school, Anais' head was found in a small box. You likely would have expected something like this to be shown in this show's cutesy art style, but there's nothing like that at all. Realistic blood covered the box inside and out. Well, Anais' head was done the normal style, but was drenched in blood and some other fluids. Not all of them hers, apparently. There was a note on the box, seemingly written in her blood. It was never stated during the episode what exactly was written on the note, but it apparently led to the rest of her remains, and Darwin's heavily mutilated corpse. What I remember most about this scene was how out of place it seemed. All the blood and gore from Darwin and Anais' slaughtered and dismembered remains was done in a very realistic and disturbing way. It looked like the scene had been taken from a crime scene photograph done by a professional, not something from a cartoon. The way the scene was animated was different from most of the show as well. You may know that the characters from the series are done in vastly differing animation styles, from flash animation to CGI. I think there was even a character done by someone putting their chin upside down to make a face. This particular scene wasn't like anything I had ever seen on the show before. Every little detail on Darwin's face was clearly illustrated,